Moments in life arrive without warning, dressed as ordinary Tuesday afternoons in small-town diners. They slip through the door with the dinner rush, hide behind polite smiles and everyday conversations, then explode into decisions that define who we really are. For Maya Johnson, that moment came with the smell of fresh coffee and the sound of cruel laughter echoing through diner on what should have been just another shift. In a world where standing up often means standing alone, where doing what's right can cost everything you've worked for, one woman's refusal to bow down would spark a chain of events that would shake an entire community to its core. This is the story of courage wearing an apron, of dignity that refuses to be bought or broken, and of how sometimes the smallest acts of defiance can create the biggest waves of change. What happens when someone finally says enough and means it? What happens when a community is forced to look in the mirror and confront the ugly truths they've been ignoring? And what happens when justice, real justice, finally comes knocking at the door? Moments in life arrive without warning, dressed as ordinary Tuesday afternoons in small-town diners. They slip through the door with the dinner rush, hide behind polite smiles and everyday conversations, then explode into decisions that define who we really are. For Maya Johnson, that moment came with the smell of fresh coffee and the sound of cruel laughter echoing through diner on what should have been just another shift. In a world where standing up often means standing alone, where doing what's right can cost everything you've worked for, one woman's refusal to bow down would spark a chain of events that would shake an entire community to its core. This is the story of courage wearing an apron, of dignity that refuses to be
This is the
bought
right.
or
This
broken,
service is
and of how
unacceptable.
sometimes the smallest acts of defiance can create the biggest waves of change. The tall man's phone call lasted exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Maya knew because she counted every second while she stood beside table 12, her hands steady despite the storm brewing inside her chest. She watched as his face grew redder with each word he spoke, his voice rising as he detailed what he called her completely unacceptable behavior and obvious discrimination against paying customers. Martinez had moved closer during the phone call, positioning herself near the coffee station where she could observe everything while appearing to work. At 62, had seen her share of difficult situations in the 30 years she had owned the diner. She had navigated economic downturns, health department inspections, and countless customer complaints. But she had never seen anything quite like this, and she was trying to assess the situation before deciding how to respond. When the man finally hung up, he turned to Maya with a triumphant smile that made her stomach turn. "That was my lawyer, and let me tell you, he's very interested in your behavior today. You just assaulted us verbally, discriminated against us because we're white, and created a hostile environment. We're going to own this place before we're done with you." Maya felt the blood drain from her face. She knew the man was twisting the truth, but she also knew how these situations often played out. His word against hers, his expensive clothes and confident demeanor against her apron and name tag. The familiar weight of systemic inequality pressed down on her shoulders like a heavy blanket. But then something unexpected happened. Mrs. Henderson, who had been quietly eating her breakfast with her grandson in the corner booth, stood up slowly and
I'm
walked
sorry,
over to
but you'll have to keep
table
it down or
12.
leave.
At 78, she moved with the careful dignity of someone who had earned every one of her years through hard work and principle. She stopped directly in front of the three men and looked them up and down with the kind of assessment that only comes from decades of evaluating character. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation, and I feel compelled to share my perspective as someone who has been coming to this establishment for over 20 years. The tall man looked annoyed at the interruption. "Ma'am, this doesn't concern you. This is between us and the waitress." Mrs. Henderson's eyebrows rose slightly. "Young man, everything that happens in this community concerns me. And what I've witnessed today is three grown men systematically harassing a young woman who has done nothing but try to serve you with professionalism and grace." She turned to address the entire diner, her voice carrying clearly to every corner. "I want everyone here to know what I saw. I watched these enter this establishment and immediately begin treating Maya with disrespect. They complained about everything she did, made disparaging comments about her service, and used language that was clearly intended to demean and intimidate her based on her race. The youngest man started to protest, but Mrs. Henderson held up a weathered hand that had clearly given many people pause over the years. "I'm not finished." When Maya finally stood up for herself and asked for basic human respect, They threatened her job and called their lawyer. This isn't about customer service. This is about your apparent belief that you have the right to treat another human being like they're beneath you. A murmur of agreement rippled through the diner. Maya looked around and realized that other customers were nodding, some pulling out their phones. She wasn't alone in this fight after all. Tom Bradley, a local contractor who had been eating breakfast at the counter, stood up and walked over. "I saw the whole thing, too," he announced. "And Mrs. Henderson is absolutely right. These men have been nothing but hostile and disrespectful since they walked in here." Sarah, a teacher who often graded papers at table 8 during her free periods, also stood up. "I was here for the entire interaction, and I recorded the last part on my phone when things got heated. Maya was completely professional throughout this whole ordeal." Maya felt tears pricking at the corners of her eyes, but they weren't tears of defeat. They were tears of relief and gratitude. Her community was standing with her. Though the tall man's confidence began to waver as he realized the room had turned against him. "This is ridiculous. We're the victims here. We came in for a simple breakfast and were treated terribly by an aggressive, hostile waitress who clearly has a problem with white customers." He finally stepped forward, and Maya could see the decision crystallizing in her boss's eyes. "Had heard enough," said, her voice calm but carrying unmistakable authority. "I've been watching this situation unfold, and I've heard multiple witness accounts of what happened here today. Maya Johnson is one of the finest employees I've ever had the privilege of working with. She treats every customer with respect and kindness, regardless of their race, background, or attitude." She paused, looking each of the three men directly in the eye. "What I've witnessed today is not a customer service issue. It's harassment. You've systematically attempted to humiliate and degrade one of my employees, and when she finally stood up for her dignity, you threatened her livelihood." The stocky man shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Look, maybe things got a little heated, but that's no reason to—" "The things got heated," interrupted, "because you made them heated. You came into my establishment and decided that you had the right to treat another human being like trash. Well, let me make something very clear to you. Maya Johnson has my complete support, and your behavior is not welcome here." She gestured toward the door. "I'm asking you to leave now." though the tall man's face flushed red again. "You can't kick us out. We're paying customers." "Actually," replied, "I can refuse service to anyone whose behavior is disruptive or disrespectful to my staff or other customers. And that's exactly what I'm doing." Maya watched the confrontation unfold with a mixture of amazement and anxiety. She was grateful for the support, but she also knew that this wasn't over. The men had made serious threats, and people like this didn't usually back down easily. The youngest man stood up abruptly, his chair falling backward with a crash. "This is insane. We'll be back with the police, and we'll see how supportive you all are when you're facing lawsuits and bad publicity." As the three men gathered their things and headed toward the door, the tall one stopped and pointed directly at Maya. "This isn't over. We know people in this town, important people. You'll regret standing up to us." The threat hung in the air like smoke after they left, and Maya felt her brief moment of triumph fade into worry. She knew that people like that usually did have connections, usually did have power, and usually didn't make empty threats. Mrs. Henderson seemed to sense her concern and walked over to place a gentle hand on Maya's arm. "Honey, you did the right thing. Don't let their threats scare you into thinking otherwise." But what if they really do have connections?" Maya asked, voicing the fear that was growing in her chest. "What if they can actually cause problems for me and—" Tom Bradley overheard and joined the conversation. "Maya, I've lived in this town for 45 years, and I know most of the important people around here. If those men think they can intimidate you with threats and powerful friends, they're about to learn something about what this community really values." Sarah was still recording on her phone. "I'm posting this on social media right now. The whole interaction, including their threats. People need to see what really happened here today." Other customers began gathering around Maya, offering their support and sharing their own witness accounts. Several people asked for her name so they could write positive reviews for the diner and specifically mention her professional service. Others offered to provide testimonies if any legal issues arose. Maya was overwhelmed by the outpouring of support, but she also couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle was just beginning. The three men hadn't acted like people who were used to losing confrontations. They had acted like people who expected their threats to be taken seriously. They pulled Maya aside while the customers were talking among themselves. Maya, I want you to know that whatever happens next, you have my complete support. What you did today took real courage, and I'm proud of you. Thank you, but I'm worried about what this might mean for the diner. If they really do have connections, if they can cause problems. This expression hardened. Let me worry about that. This diner has been here for 30 years because we treat people right and we stand up for what's correct. I'm not about to let 3 bullies change that. As the lunch rush began and the morning's drama started to settle into memory, Maya tried to focus on her work. But she couldn't shake the feeling that the confrontation at table 12 was just the beginning of something much larger. The men's threats had felt too specific, too confident to be mere bluster. She was right to be concerned. Even as she was serving lunch to her regular customers, the 3 men were across town, making phone calls and planning their next move. They hadn't expected resistance, and they certainly hadn't expected to be publicly humiliated by a waitress and a room full of witnesses. But they weren't the type of people to accept defeat gracefully. They were already working on their response, and it was going to be much more serious than Maya could have imagined. The calm before the storm was ending, and the real test of Maya's courage was about to begin. The police arrived at the diner at exactly 2:47 p.m., just as Maya was clearing the last of the lunch dishes. Officer Martinez, no relation to, despite the shared surname, walked through the front door with the measured stride of someone who had dealt with countless domestic disputes, bar fights, and customer service complaints over her 15 years on the force. Maya's heart sank when she saw the uniform. The 3 men had made good on their threat, and now she was going to have to defend herself to law enforcement. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked over to meet the officer, trying to keep her expression calm and professional. "Are you Maya Johnson?" Officer Martinez asked, pulling out a small notebook. Yes, ma'am. I assume you're here about the incident this morning." Officer Martinez nodded. "I received a complaint from 3 individuals claiming that you discriminated against them, provided terrible service, and then became verbally aggressive when they tried to address their concerns. They're requesting that I file a report and consider charges for disorderly conduct." Maya felt her world tilting. Charges. She had stood up for herself, but now she was facing the possibility of criminal charges. Before Maya could respond, Mrs. Henderson appeared at her side like a guardian angel. Officer Martinez, I'm Henderson, and I witnessed the entire incident. I believe these have seriously misrepresented what actually occurred here today. Officer Martinez looked surprised to see Mrs. Henderson. Everyone in town knew Mrs. Henderson. She had taught half the police force when they were in elementary school, and her late husband had served on the city council for 20 years. Mrs. Henderson, I didn't expect to see you here. What exactly did you witness? Mrs. Henderson straightened to her full height, which wasn't much at 78, but her presence filled the room anyway. I witnessed 3 men systematically harass and demean a young woman who was doing nothing but her job. They made racist comments, threatened her employment, and created a hostile environment that made everyone in this diner uncomfortable. Officer Martinez wrote quickly in her notebook. Can you be more specific about these racist comments? They used phrases like "you people" and "learn your place," and made it very clear that they believed their race made them superior to Maya. When she finally asked them to treat her with basic respect, they called their lawyer and threatened to ruin her life. Tom Bradley, who had been eating lunch at his usual spot at the counter, stood up and walked over. Officer Martinez, I saw the whole thing too. Those men were completely out of line. Maya was nothing but professional, even when they were treating her like dirt. Sarah looked up from her laptop where she had been working on lesson plans. I recorded part of the interaction on my phone. Would you like to see it? Officer Martinez's expression shifted as she realized she was dealing with multiple credible witnesses, including some of the most respected members of the community. Yes, I'd very much like to see that recording. Sarah pulled up the video on her phone and handed it to Officer Martinez. Maya watched the officer's face carefully as she viewed the footage. She could see the moment when Officer Martinez realized that the complaint she had received was not accurate. The recording clearly showed Maya asking politely for basic respect, the men becoming increasingly aggressive and threatening, and the community rallying around her. There was no evidence of discrimination or unprofessional behavior on Maya's part. Officer Martinez handed the phone back to Sarah and turned to Maya. Miss Johnson, based on what I've seen and heard here today, I don't believe there are grounds for any charges against you. In fact, if anything, those three men could potentially be charged with harassment or creating a public disturbance. Maya felt like she could breathe again for the first time in hours. Thank you, Officer Martinez. I was just trying to do my job and maintain my dignity. You did exactly the right thing, the officer replied. And it looks like you have quite a support system here. Emerged from the kitchen where she had been listening to the conversation. Officer Martinez, I want to make sure this incident is properly documented. Those men made serious threats against Maya and my business. I'm concerned they might try to retaliate in other ways. Officer Martinez nodded. I'll definitely include all of this in my report. Do any of you know who those men were? Did they pay with a credit card or provide any identification? Tom Bradley raised his hand. Actually, I think I might know who they are. The tall one looked familiar, and after they left, I remembered where I'd seen him before. I'm pretty sure he's Richard Blackwood, son of the Blackwood family that owns the development company outside of town. Maya's blood went cold. The Blackwood family was one of the wealthiest and most influential families in the county. Richard Blackwood's father, Harold Blackwood, served on the city council and had business connections throughout the region. If Tom was right, Maya had just stood up to someone with serious political and economic power. Officer Martinez wrote the name in her notebook. That would explain the confidence in making threats. The Blackwood family does have significant influence in this area. Mrs. Henderson's expression hardened. Influence or not, that doesn't give them the right to treat people like Maya the way they did today. If anything, their position should hold them to a higher standard of behavior. I completely agree, Officer Martinez replied. Money and connections don't give anyone the right to harass service workers. As Officer Martinez finished taking statements from the witnesses, Maya began to understand the complexity of the situation she now found herself in. She hadn't just stood up to three random customers. She had confronted someone connected to the local power structure. The implications of that realization were both terrifying and oddly liberating. Sarah was still working on her phone. I've posted the video on Facebook and Twitter, and it's already getting shared. People are outraged by what they're seeing. Maya watched over Sarah's shoulder as the video began spreading across social media. The responses were immediate and overwhelmingly supportive. Comments poured in from people she knew and complete strangers, all praising her courage and condemning the behavior of the three men. But she also noticed other types of responses beginning to appear. Some people were questioning the context of the video, suggesting that it didn't show the whole story. Others were defending Richard Blackwood, saying he was a good man who would never behave that way. The battle was moving into a new arena, and the lines were being drawn based on more than just right and wrong. Tom Bradley noticed Maya's concern as she watched the social media responses. Don't worry about the people defending him online. Half of them work for Blackwood Construction or have business dealings with the family. They're protecting their own interests, not standing up for what's right. Officer Martinez finished her report and prepared to leave. Miss Johnson, I want you to know that you handled this situation exactly as you should have. You stood up for yourself with dignity and professionalism, and you had the support of your community. That's how things are supposed to work. As the officer left, Maya realized that the day's events had changed something fundamental about her understanding of her place in the community. She had always known that racism existed, had experienced it in smaller ways throughout her life. But she had never been in a situation where she had to choose between her dignity and her security so publicly. The afternoon passed quickly as word spread throughout the town about what had happened at S diner. Maya was surprised by the number of people who stopped by specifically to show their support. Regular customers who typically ate dinner at home came in for coffee just to tell her they were proud of her. Strangers introduced themselves and shook her hand. The mayor's wife even stopped by to express her appreciation for Maya's professionalism. But Maya also noticed the people who didn't come in. Some of her regular customers who typically stopped by for afternoon coffee were conspicuously absent. She began to understand that the community was choosing sides, and not everyone was on hers. Around 4 o'clock, pulled Maya aside for a private conversation. Maya, I need you to understand what you're up against here. The Blackwood family has a lot of power in this town. They employ dozens of people directly, and their business dealings affect many more. Some folks are going to be afraid to support you publicly, even if they agree with what you did. Maya nodded. I'm starting to realize that, but I can't regret standing up for myself, even if it means facing powerful people. I'm not asking you to regret it, replied. I'm just making sure you understand that this fight is bigger than just what happened at table 12 this morning. As Maya's shift ended, she realized that she was walking into an uncertain future. The video was still spreading on social media. The local news had picked up the story, and Richard Blackwood had reportedly hired a public relations firm to manage the situation. The phone started ringing at Maya's apartment at 6:15 a.m., 3 days after the incident at the diner. Half asleep, she fumbled for the receiver, expecting to hear asking her to cover an early shift or her brother needing help with something. Instead, she heard the crisp, professional voice of a woman she didn't recognize. Miss Johnson, this is Tors from Channel 7 News. I'm calling about the incident at Diner. We've seen the social media video, and we'd like to interview you for our evening broadcast. Maya sat up straight in bed, suddenly wide awake. The story had reached the local news. I'm not sure I'm ready for that. I understand this is overwhelming, continued. But your story is resonating with people throughout the region. We've received dozens of calls from viewers who want to hear your side of what happened. After the reporter hung up, Maya's phone continued ringing. Another news station, a radio show host, a blogger who wanted to write about her experience. By 8 a.m., she had received 11 calls from various media outlets, all wanting to interview the waitress who had stood up to racist customers. When Maya arrived at the diner for her shift, she found dealing with her own media circus. 3 news vans were parked outside, and reporters were trying to interview customers as they entered and left the restaurant. The breakfast rush had turned into something resembling a carnival. Maya, thank goodness you're here, called out as she spotted her coming through the back door. We need to talk before you go out front. They sat in small office behind the kitchen. The familiar smells of coffee and bacon providing a comforting backdrop to an increasingly surreal situation. The Blackwood family released a statement yesterday, began, handing Maya a printed copy of a press release. They're claiming that Richard was the victim of reverse racism and poor service, and they're threatening to sue both you and the diner for defamation. Maya read through the carefully worded statement, her heart sinking with each paragraph. The Blackwood family's version of events painted Richard as a respectful customer who had been subjected to hostility and discrimination because of his race. They claimed that Maya had refused to serve them properly and had created a hostile environment when they tried to address their concerns. They're also claiming that the video was edited to remove context, continued. And they've hired a crisis management firm to handle their public relations. Maya looked up from the press release. I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to affect the diner. Maybe I should. Don't you dare apologize, interrupted firmly. You did nothing wrong, but I need you to understand that this is getting bigger than either of us expected. The Blackwood family doesn't just have money. They have political connections, media relationships, and a team of expensive lawyers. As if summoned by their conversation, Maya's phone rang again. This time, the caller identified himself as Williams, an attorney from the state capital who specialized in civil rights cases. Miss Johnson, I've been following your story in the news and on social media. I'd like to offer my services if you're interested in pursuing this matter legally. Maya put the phone on speaker so could hear. What do you mean legally? The behavior you described and what I've seen in the video could constitute harassment based on race. You might have grounds for a civil rights lawsuit. Additionally, if the Blackwood family follows through on their threat to sue you for defamation, you'll need legal representation. The idea of taking legal action against one of the most powerful families in the region seemed impossible to Maya. I don't know if I'm ready for something that serious. I understand, replied. But I want you to know that you have options and you have support. There are organizations that specialize in cases like this, and Maya Johnson had wanted respect and dignity. Instead, she had sparked a community-wide debate about power, privilege, and justice. The question now was whether she had the strength to see it through to the end. The real test was just beginning. What happens when someone finally says enough and means it? What happens when a community is forced to look in the mirror and confront the ugly truths they've been ignoring? And what happens when justice, real justice, finally comes knocking at the door? Maya Johnson was about to find out, one customer at a time. Maya Johnson was about to find out, one customer at a time.